Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Soini Gray, and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Telesur English. We start this new edition right now. The campaigns for Sunday's regional elections are closing in Venezuela. Dozens of international guests who will accompany the vote have already visited the National Electoral Council in Caracas. 23 state governorships are up for election. After months of violent protests, all of the main parties of Venezuela's opposition decided to take part in the ballot, even though some still say they do not recognize the country's existing institutions, including the Constituent Assembly, elected at the end of July. Our correspondent in Caracas, Regan Devines, joins us live now.
Hi, Soini. Good to hear your voice. Listen, things are really heating up here in Venezuela as the country, the people, the government, services aligned are all getting ready for Sunday's electoral vote, which, of course, as we all know, will see some registered, over 18 million registered voters choose 23 governors to represent them across the country. Now, today is particularly important because 70 electoral experts have finally arrived from neighboring countries. Earlier, they told us they were just about over 50, so we now know that 70 of them are here. What they'll do is observe the electoral process and processes. After the elections, they are mandated to submit a report to the Electoral Council, the CNE, with an analysis as well as suggestions as to how the process went and how it can be improved, if it needs to be improved at all. Now, this is really important because in context of the persistent opposition's claims of tampered votes and a rigged system in favor of the government, these electoral experts are really here to make sure that there is transparency and to ensure that the electoral process goes as it should. And of course, this is pretty serious business. In Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro has been more and more serious and adamant that he will not tolerate any violence that comes along with this, as violence to some is expected, as we had seen for the National Constituent Assembly votes. He's saying that he will not tolerate anything that resembles violence, and anyone caught trying to commit any act of violence will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So he said that his government and his National Guards will be around to ensure safety and security of voters and of the polling stations, which is why on Monday they had launched Plan Republica, which is exactly that. They charged the Bolivarian National Guard and security services and police with making sure that there's safety and security for Sunday's vote. Now, just to break this down for you, for example, in Miranda State, there are 17 municipalities there, 14,500 military, police and security personnel will be deployed to some 792 polling stations. In those polling stations, there are about 1,917 voting tables for just over 1 million registered voters. And so security is very, very intense and will be taken very seriously here. The candidate for the Miranda State governorship, Hector Rodriguez, said that he has full confidence in the Bolivarian National Guard and in the government's efforts to make sure that there is security. He has been driving a very interesting campaign. He had 716 assemblies in his Miranda State, and he connected proposals from about 3,000 communities across that state. And what that did was that it gathered the voices of persons who will be voting to find out exactly what is serious, what is important to them, and how he can work with them to ensure that those desires and what they deserve basically come to pass. For example, what was important to them were things like security, the economy, and strengthening social programs. So that is what we've seen to date. Today's Thursday. This is what we've seen to date, and campaigns are coming to a close. They'll be closed entirely by tomorrow, and all is coming along well for Sunday's vote. Soini.
Thank you so much, Reagan. I do have one quick question. The opposition is being a bit contradictory in their response to the election. They say they're willing to participate, but they still are saying that they also are not fully confident in the national institutions. How are Venezuelans responding to that sort of dual message?
Yeah, the government and opposition have always contradicted each other. And to the Venezuelan people, at least to those I've spoken to, they're really just tired, literally. We've heard this in Trinidad and Tobago, across the Caribbean, across the world. Voters, citizens are normally very tired and wary of political arguments. All they want is that what is due to them. They pay taxes. They want their taxes to go to free education, free medicine, cheaper and more inexpensive food, services, and the like. They just are interested in the economy getting better, in the security problem here in Venezuela being rectified, and that all basically comes to pass. Followers of the opposition are very skeptical that this vote will mean anything really. Supporters of the government are adamant that they will continue supporting Nicolas Maduro's government so that they continue to maintain and retain all the security services and all the services in general that the government is providing them.
Thank you so much for that update, Reagan. Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno has presented his economic plan for the next 4 years. He insisted that it was not an austerity plan.
Entonces, no hay, como se decía, tal paquetazo.
This cannot be called an austerity package.
Agradezco a todos quienes participaron en las mesas de
I
diálogo.
thank everyone who took part in the dialogue on production and taxes. We have accepted immediately 8 out of every 10 proposals. Yes, 8 out of 10. And today I am presenting my government's economic plan. We are going to prioritize Ecuadorian families, especially those who have least. We are going to strengthen the dollarization of the economy, manage public finances austerely, and fight contraband, which is the worst enemy of job creation and domestic production.
The Ecuadorian economist Hugo Villacrez told Telesio's Orlando Perez that President Moreno is hoping the private sector can breathe life back into Ecuador's flagging economy.
I think there are 2 or 3 important things which come out of the President's dialogue with different sectors and have been taken up in this new measure. Some of them are related to the plebiscite the President is calling. Essentially, they aim to make the private sector more dynamic. Remember that at the end of President Correa's government, there was a lot of talk about these public-private partnerships, which President Moreno is taking up again, saying that it is important to give incentives to the private sector. I think he's banking on the private sector to boost the economy. I think he's banking on the private sector to boost the economy in the coming years.
Telesio's Carla Gonzalez has more on these new economic measures right here in Ecuador. Carla, can you help?
Thank you, Soyini. So Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno announced a new list of reforms on tax, labor, and economics. This comes as he's been in office for 5 months, and he has accepted at least 120 of the proposals from the business sector for these reforms. The main reform will be a reduction on taxes for companies making more than $300,000. Another will be a reduction on public spending for up to $500 million. This comes as his labor ministry announced a couple of days before that up to 15,000 jobs in public sector will be cut. Another of the reforms that he announced will be a new type of labor contract. He didn't include if this would mean less or more hours or the obligation to pay Social Security for employers, because this has been a tough criticism because of the business sector saying that they need a more flexibilized market to promote more employment in the country. He also said that these reforms would not increase the prices of gas and electricity, basic services, in Ecuador. And one of the main reforms that he announced would be that he would ask citizens if they want a law that taxes land speculation to be eliminated. He would include this in this upcoming plebiscite, which is scheduled in about 2 months here in Ecuador, where he will ask another controversial question, which will be if people want to put a limit on terms for public officials, meaning that if someone was elected once, then re-elected, he would not be available, he would not be able to run for a third candidacy in Ecuador. So we'll be coming back to you with more information as soon as we hear anything else. Back to you in studios.
Thank you so much, Carl, for clarifying that situation up first. More news in a minute. Stay with us. The devastation left by Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico has already caused a sharp increase in the number of people migrating to the United States. Maria took down most of the island's power supply and left hundreds of communities without drinking water and with severe shortages of food. In just the first days after the hurricane, some 6,000 Puerto Ricans left the country. Some estimates suggest that between 20 to 30% of the population may choose to emigrate. Talking about Puerto Rico, U.S. President Donald Trump referred to the crisis in the Caribbean island in a series of tweets. He showed once again his lack of concern for the situation in Puerto Rico, as the island is still recovering after it was hit by Hurricane Maria last month. In his first tweet, he said Puerto Rico survived the hurricanes and now a financial crisis looms largely of their own making. He continues by saying, there's a total lack of accountability by the governor. Electric and all infrastructure was disaster before hurricanes. Congress to decide how much to spend. And finally, he hits Puerto Rico with another blow, saying we cannot keep FEMA, the military and the first responders who have been amazing under the most difficult circumstances, in PR forever. In response, the mayor of Puerto Rico's capital, San Juan, Carmen Yulin, hits back at Trump with a tweet. She said, at POTUS, your comments about Puerto Rico are unbecoming of a commander-in-chief. They seem more to come from a hater-in-chief. Across Latin America, indigenous peoples are celebrating their Day of Resistance. Early in the morning in the National Pantheon or Shrine in Caracas, Venezuela's indigenous communities paid tribute to Guaycapuro. He was the most famous leader of the resistance to Spanish colonial occupation in the 16th century, and his memory has become a central symbol of the Bolivarian Revolution.
Del destino que me espera por defender mi suelo y creencias. Le hago el llamado.
Later, representatives of Venezuela's indigenous communities paid tribute to the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution, Hugo Chavez, at his tomb in Caracas. They recognize his contribution to the struggle for the defense of the environment and for the rights of Venezuela's indigenous communities. It was Chavez who in 2011 decreed that October 12th be recognized as Indigenous Resistance Day. Here on Telesio, we are following the activities for Indigenous Resistance Day around the region. We have reports from Peru and Panama, but first our correspondent Osvaldo Zayas is in Paraguay.
Here in Asunción, Paraguay, indigenous communities are taking to the streets to recall those who died under colonization, something that they believe continues to affect them 500 years after the arrival of the first Spaniards in Paraguay. We should remember that in this country, over 76% of indigenous communities suffer from hunger. They live in absolute poverty. Indigenous leaders say that in Paraguay, around 18,000 indigenous people are homeless. But there's another thing that particularly affects them: large-scale agribusiness and soy crops, which are depriving them of their lands. Today, they're organizing a coordinating committee with the indigenous organizations. They already had a meeting with Senate President Fernando Lugo to discuss these issues. That's all the information we have here. Back to you, Soini. Thank you, Soini. Today, several indigenous, campesino, and social organizations are developing different activities to reject what is known here as the Race Day or Columbus Day. The slogan of this movement says, "America was not discovered, but invaded. America was not conquered, but looted." This is why they are trying to organize some cultural activities to spread these ideas, which need to be understood all around America. Here in Peru, the education system still refers to the event as the discovery of America, and children are taught about the so-called benefits for America thanks to the arrival of the Spaniards. This is what social movements want to change. This is why they're holding these activities, mainly in the indigenous and Andean towns, where today a homage to Mother Earth will be performed. Also, some cultural acts reaffirming indigenous identity will take place. These indigenous communities have been resisting during all these years, and that's why they call this date, October 12th, the Indigenous Resistance Day. We also have to mention that these organizations have said that even though the majority of the nations in Latin America are already independent, the struggle against imperialism must continue, because there are still some countries trying to invade others. This is the way they are talking about the need for the whole continent to remain united. With this information, we return to the studio.
Hola, ¿qué tal, compañeros? Un saludo. Bueno, acá en la ciudad capital de Guatemala es un día en donde organizaciones indígenas y campesinas.
Today in Guatemala City, indigenous groups and farming organizations have gathered to march and protest against various different issues that have historically been ignored. Leaving the original people of this country, where over 50% of its people are descended from the Mayan, also ignored. They're protesting and asking for access to land, access to the justice system, and for their territories to be respected and not given over to multinational companies. But also in the context of this political crisis, they're asking for reforms of the electoral law to guarantee that they be allowed to be elected to public positions so that decisions are made to benefit the indigenous populations instead of benefiting, as they call them, the small majorities of the country. They're also protesting to have guaranteed seats in the Congress, in municipalities, but mostly for political parties to be open for the participation of indigenous people. These are all part of the historic demands that the indigenous people are marching for, and the day that they chose to march is an important one as it falls on Indigenous Resistance Day, where people have been resisting for over 525 years, and today they're demonstrating once more against the illegal invasion on October 12, 1492.
We thank Mario for that report. Some indigenous people in Panama see the 12th of October as a symbol of outrage over the pillaging of their lands, and it is a struggle that continues today against the hydroelectric project, Rio Blanco.
The Barro Blanco Reservoir has been operating for over a year. The project has affected the indigenous Ngabe-Wugle community and their territory with severe flooding, damaging their crops and livelihoods.
Today, there are abuses committed just like in the past. Right now, we can see the abuses on a higher level. For us, this is exactly the same as what happened in 1502. We have continued to be treated in the same way and with the same lies.
As each day passes, the community's lands, their crops and the work that they do is closer to being lost. But the authorities do not give them or any other indigenous communities any support.
It's the same like back in 1492, when they killed us and took our gold. They are still the same people who came by the river and took the gold. This is what they are doing now again, just like they did before in 1492, and they continue to deceive the native people. And we are led to think this is true, but it is actually a lie.
The destruction and abuses being committed is just one example of the aggressive onslaught that has not only affected the Ngabe Bugle people, but also dozens of other indigenous communities within the region.
Today we can find large multinational corporations which have exploited our resources with only a few benefits given to our people, such as the mining companies and hydroelectric dams and other natural resources that are freely exploited by big companies who keep the benefits for themselves.
The future of these indigenous communities is the same as it has always been and always will be, as numerous other projects continue to be built on top of indigenous territories, without taking into account the well-being of the people who live there.
In the Peruvian Amazon, 16 indigenous communities from the province of Loreto have been on strike for 3 weeks. Their actions over oil has paralyzed the region. The groups are demanding consultation over the renewal of the oil license for Block 192, as well as compensation for several oil spills. In August, indigenous people living on Peru's largest oil field seized facilities operated by the Frontera Energy Corporation to demand that the government apply an indigenous rights law before signing a new contract with the Canadian company. The fourth round of renegotiations for the North American Free Trade Agreement kicked off this week. Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, visited Mexico City today may include some uncomfortable moments coming the day after a visit to Washington. That included a discussion about creating a new free trade deal without Mexico during talks at the White House Wednesday. President Donald Trump suggested the possibility of replacing NAFTA with a new U.S.-Canada deal that would leave Mexico out in the cold.
We'll see what happens. We have a tough negotiation, and it's something.
Our correspondent in Mexico City, Pablo Perez, has more on Trudeau's visit and on the NAFTA negotiations.
And so it is. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is arriving here at Mexico at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon to meet with President Enrique Peña Nieto to discuss the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, as he did in previous days with United States President Donald Trump. It seems that Trudeau is gonna stand by his normal stance of being friend for all and try to suit out the negotiations just before the bravados from Donald Trump saying that he will prefer binational agreements to the existing North America Free Trade Agreement. That was answered by Mexican Chancellor Luis Videgaray saying that Mexico can walk away of the negotiation at any time, that our country is bigger than any agreement and that we can do with any without the NAFTA. So it seems that there are two sides of the negotiation: the diplomatic one that is going pretty rough, and the actual negotiation that everybody agrees is going smooth because, as Videgaray pointed out, it's being done on the table by professional people, not on Twitter. So we expect that Justin Trudeau's visit to Enrique Peña Nieto and his meeting with Luis Videgaray is gonna soften up the mood of the diplomatic declarations, but the NAFTA is gonna go on, and remember, this is only the fourth round of renegotiation, and that there are still 3 more to go. here in Mexico. And nonetheless, that there are social organizations that will prefer Mexico pulling out of the NAFTA too, especially farmers, small producers that say that NAFTA has harmed their opportunity to sell their products, especially, corn, tomatoes, and everything that is being mass produced in the United States and imported at a lower price to Mexico, which has been the cause of a lot of small farmers to lose their land and have to move to the cities where they usually fall below the poverty line. So this is the situation right now here in Mexico, referring to the visit of Justin Trudeau and the NAFTA renegotiations. We go back to you.
Thank you so much, Pablo, for that report. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Moment in modern Palestinian history, Hamas and Fatah have agreed to hand over power to a unity government. After more than 10 years of division, the two rival parties agreed to hand over complete administrative control of Gaza to a unity government by the 1st of December. The decision comes after reconciliation talks were held between Hamas and Fatah on Tuesday in Cairo. The head of the Fatah delegation, Assam Al-Ahmed, spoke in Cairo detailing the next steps.
Firstly, this time, and following the orders of President Abu Mazen, who said that we should not return without agreeing, we have to fold the page of division forever, in order to unify the efforts of all of the Palestinian people, and in particularly Fatah and Hamas, so that we can face the occupation and accomplish the Palestinian dream by ending this hateful occupation and achieving the independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital.
President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Thursday to weaken the Obamacare law and make it easier for Americans to buy bare-bones health insurance plans. But the action faces possible legal challenges, hindered by the failure of Senate Republicans to pass legislation to dismantle the Democratic former President Barack Obama's signature domestic policy achievement. Trump's order marks his administration's latest effort to undermine the law without action by lawmakers. Trump's order was his most concrete step to undo Obamacare since he took office in January, after promising voters he would dismantle the 2010 law. The United States has formally notified the UN's World Heritage body, UNESCO, that it is withdrawing its membership of the organization, citing continuing anti-Israel bias and mounting arrears. Following the discussion, Israel also announced its withdrawal from the Cultural, Education and Scientific Agency. The U.S. says it will seek to remain engaged as a non-member observer state in order to contribute U.S. views, perspectives and expertise. A State Department also said that in 2011, the U.S. cancelled its budget contribution to UNESCO in protest against the admission of Palestine as a full member. UNESCO's Director General, Irina Bokova, said she had received formal notification of the withdrawal of the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.
Well, I express my deep regret. I remember what I said in 2011 already, when the United States lost its voting rights and suspended their payment, that the United States matter for UNESCO and UNESCO matters for the United States. In fact, if you go back into history, we will see not only that United States is a founding member of UNESCO, the whole idea that you can build peace through education, science, culture, communication is basically an American idea.
We've come to the end of this afternoon's evening news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesiotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Sweeney Green, and I want to thank you so much for watching.